When Charlotte Rivers risked everything to save her bookstore, she never expected to fall for billionaire Julian Stone. From impossible choices to a love that defied the odds, their story proves some risks bring the greatest rewards. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Charlotte Rivers stared at the final notice on her desk, her hands shaking as she read the words she'd been dreading for months. Final warning. Payment. Required within 48 hours. The morning sun streaming through the windows of her small bookstore did nothing to warm the chill that ran down her spine. She had exactly 2 days to come up with $100,000, or she would lose everything she'd worked for. "Mommy, can I have my breakfast now?" Emma's sweet voice called from the store's small reading nook, where she was surrounded by her favorite picture books. At 7 years old, Emma was the spitting image of Charlotte, with the same warm brown eyes and curly hair. She was also the reason Charlotte refused to give up, no matter how impossible things seemed. "Coming, sweetheart!" Charlotte quickly tucked the notice into her drawer and grabbed the brown paper bag containing Emma's morning bagel. As she watched her daughter eat, her heart ached. This bookstore wasn't just a business, it was their home, their sanctuary. The apartment above the shop was where Emma had grown up, where they'd made countless memories together. The bell above the door chimed, and Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. Julian Stone walked in, right on schedule. Every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 9:15 a.m., the mysterious tech billionaire would visit her store, browse the classic section, and leave with a carefully selected volume. He barely spoke 2 words to anyone, but his presence always filled the room. Today he looked as imposing as ever in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His dark hair was slightly windswept, and his steel-grey eyes focused intently on the shelves before him. At 42, Julian Stone was considered one of the most eligible bachelors in the country, but he was also known for being completely unapproachable. Charlotte watched him, an idea forming in her mind. It was crazy, desperate, and probably stupid, but she was out of options. The bank had refused to extend her loan. Her parents were retired and living on a fixed income. Her ex-husband hadn't paid child support in years and was somewhere in Europe with his new family. "Emma, sweetie, why don't you go upstairs and get ready for school?" Charlotte said, helping her daughter pack up her books. Once Emma was safely upstairs, Charlotte took a deep breath and approached Julian. "Mr. Stone?" Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Could I speak with you for a moment? In private?" Julian turned, raising an eyebrow slightly. It was the most expression she'd ever seen on his face. After a long pause, he nodded and followed her to the small office at the back of the store. Charlotte closed the door behind them, her heart pounding. "I have a business proposition for you," she began, fighting to keep her voice from trembling. "A business proposition?" His voice was deep and smooth, with a hint of curiosity. "I wasn't aware your store was for sale, Ms. Rivers." "It's not about the store." "Well, it is, but—" Charlotte took another deep breath. "I need $100,000 in the next 48 hours, or I lose everything. The store, my home, everything." Julian's expression remained neutral. "And you're telling me this because I'm willing to offer you something in return." Charlotte forced herself to meet his eyes. "1 weekend. My complete companionship. No questions asked. Just 1 weekend, and then we never have to speak of it again." The silence that followed was deafening. Julian studied her face, his expression unreadable. "You're proposing to sell yourself to save your bookstore?" His tone wasn't judgmental, merely questioning. "I'm proposing a transaction between consenting adults," Charlotte replied, lifting her chin. "I've seen how you look at me when you think I'm not watching. I've noticed the way you linger in the store longer when I'm alone. So I'm not naive, Mr. Stone." A flicker of something, surprise, respect, has crossed his face. "And what makes you think I would be interested in such an arrangement?" "Because you're lonely," Charlotte said softly. "I see it in your eyes every time you come here. This store is the only place I've ever seen you visit regularly. You could buy books anywhere, but you come here twice a week like clockwork." Julian moved closer, his presence filling the small office. "You're playing a dangerous game, Ms. Rivers." "I'm not playing anything. I'm fighting for survival." Charlotte stood her ground even as her heart raced. "1 weekend, that's all I'm asking. You can set the terms, the conditions, whatever you want. But I need an answer now." Julian was quiet for so long that Charlotte thought he might simply walk out. Finally, he spoke. "My mountain estate this weekend. Shall send a car for you Friday evening." He pulled out his phone and typed something. I've just transferred $10,000 to your account as a show of good faith. The remaining $90,000 will be transferred after the weekend, assuming you follow through." Charlotte's phone buzzed with the notification of the transfer, making this surreal moment suddenly very real. "How did you know my account details?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I make it my business to know everything about potential investments, Ms. Rivers." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One condition: if at any point you change your mind, you can leave. No questions asked, no repayment required. But if you do stay, you commit completely to whatever I ask of you. Are we clear?" Charlotte nodded, unable to speak. "Pack for 3 days, bring something formal for dinner, and Ms. Rivers," he turned back to look at her, "make sure your daughter has somewhere safe to stay. I'll need your complete attention." With that, he was gone, leaving Charlotte alone in her office, wondering if she'd just made a deal with the devil or found her salvation. Through the window, she watched him slide into the back of his waiting black car, his driver closing the door behind him. The enormity of what she'd just done hit her all at once. She'd just propositioned one of the most powerful men in the country. She'd offered herself as a companion for money. What kind of mother was she? But then she thought of Emma, of their home above the store, of all the children who came to her reading circles every week. Sometimes being a good mother meant making impossible choices. Charlotte walked back into the store, her legs shaky. The $10,000 was already in her account, enough to buy her some time with the most pressing creditors. She had 3 days to prepare herself for whatever Julian Stone had planned for her at his mountain estate. As she heard Emma's footsteps coming down the stairs, Charlotte straightened her shoulders and forced a smile. She would do whatever it took to protect her daughter and save their home, even if it meant spending a weekend with a man who could either be her salvation or her downfall. "Ready for school, sweetheart?" she called out, pushing away her fears and doubts. Emma bounced down the last few steps, her backpack covered in unicorn stickers. "Yes, Mommy. Can we read another chapter of Charlotte's Web tonight?" Charlotte hugged her daughter tight, breathing in the sweet smell of her strawberry shampoo. "Of course we can, baby. We can read as many chapters as you want." As she walked Emma to school, Charlotte's mind raced with preparations she needed to make. She would need to ask her best friend Lisa to watch Emma for the weekend. She'd need to find something appropriate to wear. But most importantly, she needed to prepare herself mentally for whatever Julian Stone had in store for her. The morning breeze carried the scent of approaching autumn, and Charlotte wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself. In just 3 days, she would be at the mercy of a man she barely knew, in a remote mountain estate, with nothing but her dignity and determination to protect her. The school bell rang in the distance, and Charlotte watched Emma run to join her friends in the playground. "Please let me be doing the right thing," she whispered to herself, before turning back toward her bookstore and the mountain of preparations awaiting her. The next 2 days passed in a blur for Charlotte. She'd called her best friend Lisa in tears, telling her she needed a huge favor. "I have to go away for a business meeting this weekend," Charlotte explained, hating the lie, but knowing she couldn't. "Tell the truth. Could you watch Emma?" "Of course," Lisa replied. "But honey, what kind of business meeting? You've never left Emma overnight before." Charlotte clutched the phone tighter. It's an important investor, someone who might be able to save the store." It wasn't completely a lie, she told herself. Julian Stone was investing in her store, just not in the way everyone thought. After closing the store Wednesday evening, Charlotte stood in front of her closet, staring at her clothes with growing panic. Everything looked too ordinary, too worn. What did one pack for a weekend with a billionaire? The only formal dress she owned was the navy blue cocktail dress she'd worn to her cousin's wedding 2 years ago. Emma sat on Charlotte's bed, watching her mother pull clothes out and put them back. "Why do you need fancy clothes for a business meeting, Mummy?" Charlotte's heart clenched. "Sometimes grown-ups have to dress up for important meetings, sweetie, like when you wear your special dress for school pictures." Emma nodded sagely. "Can I help you pick?" "Sure, baby." Charlotte sat next to her daughter, pulling her close. "What do you think would make Mommy look professional?" As Emma sorted through her clothes with great seriousness, Charlotte fought back tears. Was she really going to go through with this? The $10,000 Julian had sent was already being used to hold off the most aggressive creditors, but it was just a band-aid. She needed the full amount to truly save the store. Thursday morning came too quickly. Julian arrived at his usual time, but instead of browsing the classics section, he walked straight to her office. "Is everything arranged for tomorrow?" he asked without preamble. Charlotte nodded, trying to appear more confident than she felt. "Yes, what time should I expect your car?" 6 p.m. sharp. He placed a small box on her desk. "Wear this for dinner tomorrow night." Before she could respond, he was gone. Charlotte opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside was a stunning red silk dress, along with matching shoes and a delicate gold necklace. The price tags were removed, but she knew the outfit probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Oh my God," she whispered, touching the silk gently. The dress was exactly her size. Of course it was. Julian Stone didn't seem like the type of man who left anything to chance. That night, after Emma was asleep, Charlotte tried on the dress. The reflection in her mirror showed a different woman, someone elegant, desirable. The dress hugged her curves perfectly, the deep red color making her pale skin glow. For a moment she could almost pretend this was normal, that she was simply preparing for a romantic weekend away, but there was nothing normal about this situation. Friday morning dawned grey and cool. Charlotte went through the motions of opening the store, helping customers and doing the inventory. Every few minutes her eyes would drift to the clock. At 3 o'clock she closed the store early. "Time to pack for your sleepover with Aunt Lisa," she told Emma, trying to sound excited. "Will you call me every night?" Emma asked, carefully, picking which stuffed animals to take. "Of course I will, baby, every single night." Charlotte helped her pack, making sure Mr. Snuggles, Emma's favorite teddy bear, was safely tucked in the overnight bag. Lisa arrived at 5, giving Charlotte just enough time to get ready. "Are you sure everything's okay?" Lisa asked, studying her friend's face. "You seem different." "I'm fine," Charlotte insisted, applying her makeup with extra care, just nervous about the meeting. "Well, you look amazing," Lisa said, eyeing the new dress. "If I didn't know better, I'd think you were going on a date." Charlotte forced a laugh. "Don't be silly, it's strictly business." At exactly 6 o'clock, a sleek black car pulled up outside the store. The driver, a discreet-looking man in his 50s, opened the back door. "Ms. Rivers, Mr. Stone is waiting at the estate." Charlotte hugged Emma tight, breathing in her daughter's familiar scent. "Be good for Aunt Lisa, okay? I love you so much." "Love you too, Mommy." Emma waved cheerfully, completely unaware of the turmoil in her mother's heart. The car was luxurious, with soft leather seats and tinted windows that hid her from the world. As they drove out of town, Charlotte watched the familiar streets fade away. The drive took almost 2 hours, winding up into the mountains on increasingly private roads. Finally, they turned onto a gated driveway that seemed to go on forever. When the house came into view, Charlotte gasped. House was an understatement. It was a modern mansion of glass and stone, perched on the edge of a cliff with views of the valley below. Julian was waiting at the entrance, looking devastatingly handsome in a black suit. "Welcome to Stone Summit, Ms. Rivers," he said, offering his hand to help her out of the car. Charlotte took his hand, feeling calluses she hadn't expected on a billionaire's fingers. His touch sent an unexpected shiver through her body. "Dinner will be served in an hour," he continued, leading her inside. "Maria will show you to your room so you can freshen up." A middle-aged housekeeper appeared, smiling warmly. "This way, miss." Charlotte followed Maria up a sweeping staircase, trying not to gawk at the stunning interior. Everything was modern and elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the mountain views. Her room was bigger than her entire apartment above the bookstore. A king-sized bed dominated one wall, while a sitting area with plush chairs faced a fireplace. The bathroom was all marble and glass, with a tub big enough for 3 people. "Mr. Stone asks that you wear the red dress for dinner," Maria said, helping Charlotte unpack. "Would you like help with your hair?" Charlotte started to refuse, then remembered where she was. This weekend, she was playing a different role. "Yes, please." As Maria styled her hair into elegant waves, Charlotte studied her reflection in the vanity mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, sophisticated, beautiful, and more than a little scared. "Mr. Stone is a good man," Maria said suddenly, meeting Charlotte's eyes in the mirror. "Despite what people say about him." Charlotte wanted to ask what people said, but Maria had already stepped back. "There, you look lovely. Dinner is served in the main dining room at 8 sharp." Alone in the massive room, Charlotte walked to the windows. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere down in the valley, her daughter was probably having dinner with Lisa, maybe reading a story before bed. "I'm doing this for you, Emma," Charlotte whispered, touching the cold glass. "For our home, for our future." The clock struck 7:30. Charlotte slipped into the red dress, applied a final coat of lipstick, and took a deep breath. It was time to earn her $100,000. As she walked down the grand staircase, she saw Julian waiting at the bottom, a glass of wine in his hand. His eyes traveled slowly up her body, lingering on the way the dress hugged her curves. "You look exquisite," he said, his voice low and intense. Charlotte felt her cheeks flush. "Thank you, the dress is beautiful." "For the dress is merely a frame," he replied, offering his arm. "You're the masterpiece." As he led her to the dining room, Charlotte's heart raced. What had she gotten herself into, and why did her body react so strongly to this man's presence? The weekend was just beginning, and Charlotte already felt herself being pulled into Julian Stone's orbit. She only hoped she'd emerge from it with her heart intact. The dining room took Charlotte's breath away. A massive crystal chandelier hung over a long table set for two, while candles flickered in ornate silver holders. One entire wall was glass, showing the twinkling lights of the valley below. "Wine?" Julian asked, pulling out her chair. "Yes, please." Charlotte needed something to calm her nerves. She watched as he poured deep red wine into delicate crystal glasses. "I hope you like Italian food," he said, taking his seat across from her. "My chef specializes in authentic Tuscan cuisine." As if on cue, a server appeared with their first course, a delicate salad of fresh greens and pine nuts. Charlotte took a small bite, trying to remember her table manners. "Tell me, Ms. Rivers," Julian began, studying her over his wineglass, "what made you choose books as your business?" "Please call me Charlotte," she said, "and I've always loved books. They were my escape when I was young. My parents couldn't afford many luxuries, but the library was free." Something flickered in Julian's eyes. "And now you provide that escape for others." "I try to." Charlotte took another sip of wine, feeling its warmth spread through her. "Every child who comes into my store gets to choose a free book on their birthday. It's not great for profits, but it feeds the soul," Julian finished unexpectedly. He noticed her surprised look and almost smiled. "What? Did you think I was completely heartless?" "I don't know what to think about you," Charlotte admitted. "Everyone knows about Julian Stone, the tech genius billionaire. But sitting here, you seem different." The server cleared their plates and brought the main course, perfectly cooked pasta in a light sauce that smelled heavenly. "Different how?" Julian pressed. "More human." Charlotte met his eyes. "When you come to the store, you always seem so closed off. But I've seen you watching the children during story time. You pretend to browse, but you're listening." Julian was quiet for a long moment. "My mother used to read to me," he said finally. "Every night, no matter how busy she was. After she died, books became my only companions." Charlotte's heart squeezed. "How old were you?" 12. His voice was flat, but Charlotte saw pain flash across his face. "My father buried himself in work after that. I was raised by nannies and tutors." "Is that why you built this place?" Charlotte looked around at the beautiful but somehow lonely house. "To get away from everything? I built it because I was tired of people wanting things from me." His grey eyes fixed on her. "Which brings us to you, Charlotte. What exactly do you want from me beyond the obvious?" Charlotte felt her cheeks flush. "I told you what I want, to save my store, my home. And you're willing to do anything for that?" His voice had a dangerous edge. "Not anything," Charlotte said firmly. "I have my limits, Mr. Stone." "Julian," he corrected. "If we're going to spend the weekend together, we should at least be on a first-name basis." The server cleared their plates and brought dessert, a rich chocolate torte that made Charlotte's mouth water. "Tell me about your daughter," Julian said, surprising her again. Charlotte's face softened. "Emma, she's everything to me. Smart, kind, always reading. She wants to be a veterinarian and a princess. She hasn't quite decided which is more important." "And her father?" Charlotte's smile faded. "Left when she was 2. Married his secretary, moved to Europe. He sends a birthday card sometimes when he remembers." "His loss," Julian said quietly. They finished dessert in comfortable silence. Charlotte found herself relaxing, the wine and good food making her feel almost normal, almost like this was a real date instead of whatever it was. "Would you like to see the library?" Julian asked as they finished their coffee. Charlotte's eyes lit up. "You have a library?" He led her down a corridor and opened a set of heavy wooden doors. Charlotte gasped. The room was 2 stories tall, with wooden shelves reaching to the ceiling and rolling ladders to reach the highest books. A fireplace crackled warmly, with leather chairs arranged around it. "Oh my God," she breathed, running her fingers along the spines of leather-bound classics. "This is amazing." Julian watched her explore with an intensity that made her skin tingle. "Choose one," he said. "What?" "Choose a book. Any book you want." Charlotte scanned the shelves until she found a familiar title. "This one," she said, pulling out a well-worn copy of Jane Eyre. "Interesting choice." Julian took the book from her hands, his fingers brushing hers. "A story about a poor young woman in the house of a wealthy, mysterious man, with a mad woman in the attic," Charlotte joked nervously. "Should I be worried?" "No mad women here," Julian said, stepping closer. "Just a man who's very curious about the woman who dared to proposition him to save her bookstore." Charlotte's heart raced as he moved even closer. She could smell his cologne, a mix of sandalwood and something spicy. "Are you going to kiss me, Julian?" she whispered. "No." His answer surprised her. "Not yet. This weekend isn't just about physical attraction, Charlotte. I want to know what makes you tick, what drives you, what scares you." "You scare me," she admitted. "Good." He stepped back, leaving her feeling oddly bereft. "Fear keeps us honest. Now it's getting late, and tomorrow will be a long day. I have plans for us." "What kind of plans?" "You'll see." He opened the library door. "Sleep well, Charlotte." Back in her room, Charlotte changed into her nightgown and sat by the window. The mountains were dark shadows against the starlit sky. She thought about Emma, probably asleep in Lisa's guest room by now. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Emma's fine, had a great day. She says goodnight and loves you." Tears pricked Charlotte's eyes. What would Emma think if she knew what her mother was really doing? But then she remembered the final notice, the threat of losing everything. Sometimes love meant making impossible choices. Charlotte slipped between the silk sheets, more luxurious than anything she'd ever slept in. In the darkness, she thought about Julian, his unexpected warmth, the pain in his eyes when he mentioned his mother, the way he looked at her in that red dress. This weekend was supposed to be a simple transaction. So why did her heart race every time he looked at her? And why did she have a feeling that by Sunday night, nothing in her life would ever be simple again? Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of grey eyes and leather-bound books, of deals with handsome devils and the price of saving everything she loved. Charlotte woke to sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. For a moment she was disoriented by the luxurious surroundings, then remembered where she was and why. Her phone showed 3 texts from Lisa, all pictures of Emma having breakfast, getting ready for her Saturday art class, smiling wide with missing front teeth. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Come in?" Maria entered with a tray of coffee and pastries. "Good morning, miss. Mr. Stone asks that you join him for breakfast on the terrace in 30 minutes. He suggested comfortable clothes for outdoor activities." Charlotte's stomach fluttered. Outdoor activities? What exactly did Julian have planned? She chose black leggings and a soft blue sweater from her suitcase, hoping it was appropriate. After brushing her hair into a simple ponytail and applying minimal makeup, she made her way downstairs. The terrace was even more beautiful in the morning light. Julian stood at the glass railing, wearing dark jeans and a grey cashmere sweater. That made him look more approachable than his usual suits. He turned as she approached and his eyes warmed. "Sleep well?" he asked, pulling out a chair for her. "Better than I expected," Charlotte admitted, taking in the spread of fresh fruit, eggs and warm breads. "This looks amazing." "Eat well, you'll need your energy today." Julian poured her coffee, adding cream exactly the way she liked it. When she looked surprised, he shrugged. "I pay attention when you make your coffee at the store." They ate in comfortable silence, watching the morning mist rise from the valley below. Charlotte couldn't help noticing how different Julian seemed here, more relaxed, almost gentle. "So what's on the agenda for today?" she finally asked. "First, a tour of the grounds, then I thought we might go riding." "Riding? As in horses?" Charlotte's eyes widened. "I've never been on a horse in my life." "Then it's time you learned." Julian's lips curved in a small smile. "Don't worry, I'll keep you safe." After breakfast, they walked through the manicured gardens. Julian pointed out different flowers and plants, surprising Charlotte with his knowledge of horticulture. "My mother loved gardens," he explained, touching a rose petal gently. "This is all modeled after her designs." "You must miss her very much," Charlotte said softly. "Every day." Julian was quiet for a moment. "What about your parents? You mentioned they couldn't afford much when you were young." "They worked hard. Dad at the factory, Mom cleaning houses, they did their best." Charlotte smiled at the memories. "They're retired now, living in Florida. They help when they can, but you won't ask them for money," Julian finished. "You're proud, independent." "I have to be for Emma." They reached the stables where 2 horses were already saddled. Charlotte's was a gentle-looking brown mare, while Julian's was a magnificent black stallion. "This is Belle," Julian said, leading Charlotte to the mare. "She's perfect for beginners." Charlotte approached nervously, but the horse merely nuzzled her hand. Julian showed her how to mount, his strong hands on her waist, making her heart race. Once she was settled, he got on his own horse with practiced ease. "Ready?" he asked. They rode slowly along well-maintained trails, Julian staying close to guide her. The morning was perfect. Crisp autumn air, leaves starting to turn, golden red, mountains stretching endlessly around them. "Why did you really accept my proposition?" Charlotte asked suddenly. "You could have any woman you want. Why agree to this arrangement?" Julian was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Because you surprised me," he finally said. "Do you know how rare that is in my world? Everyone wants something from me, money, power, connections, but you were direct, honest, even desperate. You had dignity. And that intrigued you. More than intrigued." His eyes held hers. "It woke something in me I thought was dead." They reached a clearing with a breathtaking view of the valley. Julian helped Charlotte dismount, his hands lingering on her waist, longer than necessary. They spread a blanket that had been packed in the saddlebags, along with a lunch of sandwiches and fresh fruit. "Tell me about Emma," Julian said as they ate. "What's she like?" Charlotte's face lit up. "She's amazing, so smart, so kind. She reads to the younger kids at the store sometimes, and she's brave, braver than me. When her father left, she just hugged me and said, 'Don't worry, Mommy, we don't need him anyway.' She sounds like her mother," Julian said softly. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm not brave. Look at what I'm doing here. You're sacrificing your pride to save your daughter's home. That's not weakness, Charlotte, that's strength." Without warning, he reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek. The touch sent electricity through her body. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Julian moved closer, his hand cupping her face. This time, when he leaned in, he didn't pull back. His lips met hers in a kiss that started gentle, but quickly deepened with hunger. Charlotte found herself responding, her hands gripping his sweater, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I shouldn't have done that," Julian said roughly. "Why not?" "Because this is supposed to be a transaction, and I'm starting to want things I shouldn't." "What things?" Charlotte whispered. Instead of answering, Julian stood abruptly. "We should head back, storm's coming." Charlotte looked up. Sure enough, dark clouds were gathering over the mountains. They quickly packed up and mounted their horses, riding back at a faster pace as thunder rumbled in the distance. They reached the stables just as the first heavy drops began to fall. Running for the house, they got caught in the downpour. By the time they made it inside, they were both soaking wet and laughing. Charlotte couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like this. Her sweater clung to her body, and she was suddenly very aware of Julian's eyes on her. "You should change before you catch cold," he said, his voice husky. "Julian," Charlotte stepped closer to him. "What's really happening here?" He touched her face again, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "Something dangerous," he murmured. "Something I'm not sure I can control." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating his face. In that moment, Charlotte saw past his walls, saw loneliness, desire, and something that looked almost like fear. "Maybe," she said softly. "Some things aren't meant to be controlled." Thunder crashed overhead, but neither of them moved it. They stood frozen in that moment, both knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. The weekend was only half over, and already the lines between transaction and truth were blurring. Charlotte had come here to save her bookstore, but standing in Julian's arms, she wondered if she might lose her heart instead. The storm raged outside, rain lashing against the windows of Stone Summit. After changing into dry clothes, Charlotte found herself drawn to the library again. The room felt cozy with the fireplace lit, thunder echoing through the mountains beyond the windows. She was curled up in one of the leather chairs reading Jane Eyre when Julian appeared in the doorway. He'd changed into black pants and a dark blue sweater that made his grey eyes seem stormy. "Dinner will be delayed," he said, walking in. "The power lines are down. The generator's running, but Maria's having to improvise in the kitchen." "That's fine." Charlotte marked her place in the book. "I'm not very hungry anyway." Julian poured 2 glasses of wine from a crystal decanter and handed one to her. "Nervous about being trapped here with me?" "Should I be?" He sat in the chair opposite her, studying her face in the firelight. "You know, when you first made your proposition, I thought I had you figured out. The desperate single mother, willing to do anything to save her business. And now? Now I'm not sure of anything." Julian took a drink of his wine. You're not what I expected. Charlotte Rivers. Neither are you. Charlotte set her book aside. The Julian Stone who comes to my bookstore is different, colder. That Julian Stone is what people expect. The ruthless businessman, the tech genius who cares about nothing but profit. His voice was bitter. It's easier to be what people expect. Is that why you live up here alone, to avoid expectations? Lightning flashed, illuminating his face. For a moment he looked vulnerable, almost young. I live here because it's safer. People can't hurt you if you don't let them close. Who hurt you, Julian? Charlotte asked softly. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. My wife, he finally said. Charlotte felt her heart skip. You were married? Briefly, 10 years ago. Rebecca was everything I thought I wanted. Beautiful, sophisticated, from the right family. His laugh was harsh. She was also sleeping with my best friend and business partner. They were planning to take control of my company. What happened? I caught them, of course. The prenup protected the company, but he stared into the fire. The betrayal nearly destroyed me. James had been my friend since college. He knew everything about me, about my mother, about why trust was so hard for me, and still, Charlotte moved without thinking, kneeling beside his chair. I'm so sorry. Don't. His voice was rough. Don't be kind to me, Charlotte. This isn't that kind of weekend. Then what kind of weekend is it? Julian set his wine down and caught her face in his hands. The kind where I'm supposed to take what I want and not feel anything. The kind where you get your money and we never speak of it again. That was the deal. Maybe the deal was wrong, Charlotte whispered. He kissed her then, hard and desperate. Charlotte responded with equal hunger, all the tension of the day exploding between them. His hands tangled in her hair as she climbed into his lap, pressing closer. A loud crack of thunder made them jump apart. They stared at each other, both, breathing hard. Mr. Stone, Maria's voice called from the hallway. Dinner is ready in the small dining room. Julian helped Charlotte to her feet, his hands lingering on her waist. We should... Yes, Charlotte agreed quickly, smoothing her hair. We should eat. The small dining room was lit with candles, creating an intimate atmosphere. Maria had managed to prepare a simple but elegant meal of cold meats, cheeses, and fresh bread. They ate in charged silence, both aware of the shift in their relationship. Outside, the storm showed no signs of letting up. Tell me about your store, Julian said suddenly. How did it start? Charlotte welcomed the change of subject. It was my dream since I was little. I used to imagine having my own magical place, full of books. When Emma was born, I was working at a big chain bookstore. Her father had just left and I was terrified of how I'd manage alone. She took a sip of wine, remembering. Then my grandmother passed away. She left me a small inheritance. Not much, but enough for a down payment on the store. Everyone said I was crazy to open a bookstore in the age of Amazon and e-readers, but I had to try. And you succeeded, for a while. Charlotte's smile faded. The first few years were good. I built a community, started the children's reading program. But then the economy turned and the rent kept going up and now you're here, Julian finished. Now I'm here. Charlotte met his eyes. With a man who keeps surprising me. How so? You're not as cold as you pretend to be. I've seen how you watch the children at story time, how you smiled today when we were riding, how you talk about your mother. Julian's face hardened. Don't make the mistake of thinking you know me, Charlotte. I don't, she said quietly. But I'd like to. Before he could respond, the lights flickered and went out completely. The generator had failed. Stay here, Julian said, rising. I'll get more candles. In the darkness, Charlotte heard him moving around, opening drawers. More lightning flashed, followed immediately by thunder. The storm was directly overhead now. Julian, she called, suddenly nervous. In the pitch black. I'm here. His voice was closer than she expected. She felt his hand find hers in the dark. Come on. The library has more candles, and it's warmer with the fireplace. He led her carefully through the dark house, his grip strong and sure. In the library, the fire provided enough light to see by. Julian lit several candles, creating pools of warm light. Looks like we're stuck here for a while, he said, looking out at the storm. The roads will be dangerous until morning. Charlotte shivered, though not from cold. Julian. He turned to look at her, his face shadowed in the candlelight. Yes? Why did you really bring me here? The truth. Because you fascinate me, he said simply. Because you're real in a way no one in my world is. Because when you offered yourself to save your store, I saw something in your eyes that haunted me. What did you see? Strength, pride, fear. He moved closer. Desire. Charlotte's heart raced. And now I'm afraid I'm going to break our deal completely. His hand cupped her cheek. Because I don't want this to be a transaction anymore, Charlotte. I want it to be real. The candlelight flickered as he pulled her into his arms. Outside, the storm raged on. But in that moment, all Charlotte could feel was the heat of Julian's embrace and the dangerous knowledge that she was falling for a man who had sworn never to trust again. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a clean, crisp mountain air. Charlotte woke in her own bed, alone, memories of the previous night flooding back. After their intense conversation in the library, Julian had kissed her goodnight, but insisted they sleep separately. "We need to think clearly," he'd said, his voice rough with emotion. "Both of us." Now, in the bright morning light, Charlotte wasn't sure what to think. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from Lisa. Her heart stopped when she listened to the voicemails. "Charlotte, call me as soon as you can. Something's happened at the store." "Charlotte, please call back. There's been some kind of mistake with your bank account." "Charlotte, it's urgent. The bank is saying all the money that was deposited has been frozen. They're claiming it might be fraudulent. Call me." Charlotte's hands shook as she dialed Lisa's number. Finally, Lisa answered immediately. "Charlotte, what's going on? Men from the bank came to the store this morning. They're saying the money you received is under investigation. They're threatening to press charges." "What?" Charlotte felt sick. "That's impossible. It was a legitimate business investment." "Well, they're saying otherwise." "And Charlotte, someone leaked to the local news that you're away with Julian Stone. There are reporters outside the store." Charlotte sat heavily on the bed. This couldn't be happening. "Is Emma okay?" "She's fine, still sleeping, but Charlotte, what's really going on? Are you really with Julian Stone?" "Lisa, Charlotte's voice broke. "I can't explain right now. Just keep Emma away from the reporters, please." She hung up and rushed to dress, her mind racing. As she opened her door, she nearly ran into Maria. "Mr. Stone requests your presence in his office immediately," the housekeeper said, her face worried. Julian's office was on the 3rd floor, a modern space with even more spectacular views. He was standing at the window when Charlotte entered, his back rigid with tension. "Have you seen the news?" he asked without turning. "I just heard from Lisa." "Julian, what's happening?" He turned then, his face dark with anger. But Charlotte realized with relief that the anger wasn't directed at her. "Rebecca," he said, spitting out the name like poison. "My ex-wife. Apparently she's still on the board of one of my smaller companies. She saw the transfer to your account and raised concerns about fraud. But it wasn't fraud. I know that." Julian ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "But she's managed to convince enough people to launch an investigation. The press is already running with the story. Respected businessman Julian Stone, potentially victim of a con woman." Charlotte felt the room spin. "Con woman, but I never—" "Of course you didn't." Julian moved to her quickly, taking her hands. "Charlotte, look at me. I'm going to fix this." "How?" "My daughter is out there with reporters surrounding our home. The bank is threatening charges. Everything I tried to save is falling apart. I won't let that happen." Julian's voice was fierce. "But Charlotte, there's something else you need to know. Rebecca, she's not just doing this out of spite. She wants something." "What?" "Me. Back on the board of directors. She and James, my former friend, their company is failing. They need access to my resources." Charlotte pulled away from him. "So this is all just corporate games? And I'm what, collateral damage?" "No," Julian caught her arm. "This is Rebecca trying to destroy something she thinks is important to me. She's always been good at finding weaknesses to exploit." "Is that what I am? A weakness?" Julian's face softened. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, and I'm not going to let her hurt you." Charlotte's phone buzzed again. Another call from Lisa. "I have to go home. I have to protect Emma from this mess." "You can't leave now. It'll only make things look worse." Julian paced the office. "Give me 24 hours. I can have my lawyers shut this down, clear your name." "And what do you want in return?" Charlotte asked bitterly. "Another weekend? Another deal? Damn it, Charlotte!" Julian slammed his hand on the desk. "Stop thinking about this as a transaction. I care about you." The words hung in the air between them. Charlotte stared at him, seeing the raw emotion in his eyes. "If you care about me," she said quietly, "then help me protect my daughter. She's all that matters now." Julian was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, I have a plan, but you're not going to like it. Tell me." "We go public, together, not as a scandal, but as a legitimate relationship. We say we've been quietly dating for months. That the money was a business investment in your store because I believe in what you're doing. You want me to lie? I want to tell a version of the truth that protects both of us. Julian took her hands again. Charlotte, what happened between us this weekend? It wasn't part of any deal. You know that. Before she could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Rebecca Stone. Julian's face hardened as he answered. What do you want? Charlotte could hear a woman's sultry laugh through the speaker. Really, darling? A bookstore owner. I expected better taste from you. Leave her out of this, Rebecca. Oh, but she's already in it. The press is having a field day. Poor little single mother trying to seduce the billionaire. It would be tragic if it wasn't so pathetic. Julian's knuckles were white around the phone. Name your price. You know what I want. Your seat on the board, access to your tech patents, and a public reconciliation. Imagine the headlines. Tech mogul reunites. With first love saves marriage. And if I refuse, then your little bookworm goes to jail for fraud. Her daughter goes into the system, and your reputation becomes another cautionary tale about rich men thinking with their... Julian ended the call, his face murderous. I'm going to destroy her. No, Charlotte said, feeling strangely calm. You're going to give her what she wants. What? Charlotte, no. It's the only way to protect Emma. Charlotte fought back tears. You can restart your life with Rebecca, save your reputation. I'll find another way to save the store. Julian caught her face in his hands. Listen to me. What happened between us was real. I won't let Rebecca take that away. Sometimes. Charlotte whispered, love means making impossible choices. You taught me that. Outside the office windows, the mountain sun continued to shine, oblivious to the storm brewing in their hearts. Charlotte knew that whatever happened next would change not just their lives, but the lives of everyone they cared about. The weekend, that was supposed to be a simple transaction, had become a battle for their hearts, their reputations, and their futures, and now they had to decide what and who they were willing to sacrifice to protect the ones they loved. Charlotte sat in Julian's home office, watching him work the phones. He'd been at it for hours, calling lawyers, board members, and media contacts. His tie was loose, his sleeves rolled up, showing a different side of the polished businessman she'd first met. I don't care what it costs, he was saying into the phone. I want every detail of Rebecca and James's business dealings for the past 5 years. There has to be something we can use. While he talked, Charlotte scrolled through the news on her phone. The stories were getting worse. Billionaire's bookstore scandal, con woman or true love. Single mom seduces tech mogul. The full story. Julian Stone's ex-wife speaks out. He's being manipulated. Tears burned her eyes as she read the comments. People were calling her a gold digger, a bad mother, a con artist. Some were even calling for Emma to be taken away from her. Her phone buzzed with another call from Lisa. Charlotte, you need to come home. Child Services was here asking questions. Charlotte felt her world tilt. What? They said they received an anonymous complaint about Emma's welfare. Charlotte, what have you gotten yourself into? Julian must have seen her face change. He ended his call immediately. What's wrong? Child Services? Charlotte could barely speak through her panic. Rebecca, she's trying to take Emma. Julian's face went deadly calm. That scared her more than any show of anger would have. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Maria, have the car brought around, now. What are you doing? We're going to get your daughter. He was already shrugging into his suit jacket. Then we're going to end this. The drive back to town was tense. Charlotte kept checking her phone, terrified of what new disaster might appear. Julian worked his own phone, speaking in clipped tones to various people. As they approached the bookstore, they could see the crowd of reporters outside. Julian squeezed Charlotte's hand. Are you ready? She nodded, though her heart was racing. Julian's driver pulled around to the back alley. They slipped in through the service entrance, climbing the stairs to Charlotte's apartment. Lisa opened the door before they could knock, Emma running to hug her mother. Mommy, did you know there are TV people outside? They wanted to take my picture, but Aunt Lisa wouldn't let them. Charlotte hugged her daughter tight, breathing in her familiar scent. You did exactly right, baby. Listen, we need to go away. For a little while, okay? Emma looked past her mother to Julian, who stood awkwardly in the doorway. Are you my mom's boyfriend? The newspapers said you were. Julian knelt down to Emma's level. Your mom is very special to me, and right now some bad people are trying to hurt her. Will you help me protect her? Emma considered this seriously. Like in Harry Potter when his friends help him fight the bad wizards. Exactly like that. Julian smiled, and Charlotte's heart squeezed at how natural he was with her daughter. "Then yes," Emma said firmly, "I'll help." They quickly packed some essentials for Emma. Lisa hugged Charlotte goodbye, whispering, "Be careful." As they headed downstairs, Julian's phone rang. His face darkened as he answered. "Rebecca, I was just about to call you." He put the phone on speaker so Charlotte could hear. "Really? From what I hear, you're busy playing house with your little bookworm and her brat. You crossed a line." Julian's voice was ice. "Calling child services? That's low, even for you." Rebecca laughed. "Oh, darling, you have no idea how low I can go. By the way, have you seen the latest news? Someone leaked some very interesting security footage from your mountain house. Poor Charlotte looks quite comfortable there. What will her daughter think when she's old enough to see it?" Charlotte felt sick. The security cameras, she hadn't even thought about them. But Julian was smiling, a cold, dangerous smile. "Funny you should mention security footage. Did you know I never removed my access to your company's system after the divorce? I have some very interesting footage of my own. You and James planning this little scheme, discussing how to manipulate company funds. The board might find it enlightening." There was silence on the other end. "So here's what's going to happen," Julian continued. "You're going to call off the dogs, release a statement saying it was all a misunderstanding, clear Charlotte's name completely. In return, I won't release the footage that would send you and James to prison." "You're bluffing," Rebecca said, but her voice wavered. "Try me. You taught me how to be ruthless, remember? Now I'm just returning the favor." More silence, then, "Fine. But this isn't over, Julian. That woman will never fit in your world. She'll leave you, just like everyone else." "No," Julian said quietly. "She won't. Because unlike you, Charlotte's love isn't based on what she can take from me." He ended the call and turned to Charlotte and Emma. "Let's go. My lawyers will handle the rest." "Where are we going?" Emma asked excitedly. "Somewhere safe," Julian said. "Somewhere your mom and I can figure things out." As they walked to the car, Emma between them holding both their hands, Charlotte felt something shift in her heart. This wasn't just about saving her store anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was about building something real, something lasting. They managed to slip past the reporters, who were all rushing to check their phones as Rebecca's retraction hit the news wires. In the car, Emma fell asleep with her head in Charlotte's lap. "I'm sorry," Julian said softly. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "I know," Charlotte touched his hand, "but it did happen, and now we have to decide what comes next." "What do you want to come next?" Charlotte looked down at her sleeping daughter, then back at the man who had risked everything to protect them. "I want to stop pretending this is just a deal. I want to see if what we feel for each other is real." "It's real," Julian said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think it was real from the first moment you dared to proposition me in your office." They both laughed softly, careful not to wake Emma. "We'll have to take it slow," Charlotte said. "Emma has to come first." "Of course." Julian watched the little girl sleep. "She's extraordinary, like her mother." As they drove through the darkening evening, Charlotte felt hope rising in her chest. The weekend that had started as a desperate bargain was ending with something far more valuable than money. The chance at real love, real family, real happiness. But in the back of her mind, Rebecca's words echoed. Would she ever truly fit in Julian's world? And more importantly, did she want to? The answers to those questions would have to wait. For now she had her daughter safe beside her, and a man who had proved he would fight for her. Sometimes she realized love meant not just making impossible choices, but finding the courage to live with them. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation with Rebecca. Julian had moved Charlotte and Emma into a luxury apartment in the city, while the media circus around the bookstore died down. The store itself was temporarily closed for what Julian called renovations, though Charlotte knew he was really having his security team sweep for any surveillance equipment Rebecca might have planted. "Mommy, look!" Emma called from the apartment's floor-to-ceiling windows. "I can see my school from here." Charlotte joined her daughter at the window, still amazed by the view of the city spread out below them. The apartment was beautiful, but she missed their cozy rooms above the bookstore. "Mr. Julian said I can paint my new room any color I want," Emma continued excitedly. "Can we make it look like the night sky, with stars and everything?" "We'll see, sweetie." Charlotte stroked her daughter's hair. "Remember, this is just temporary until things settle down." "But why can't we stay?" Emma looked up at her mother with those two wise eyes. "Don't you love Mr. Julian?" Before Charlotte could answer, the apartment's security system announced Julian's arrival. He walked in carrying several shopping bags and a stack of papers. "Good news," he said, setting everything down. "The PR team has managed to shift the narrative. The press is now calling it a modern fairy tale. Successful businessman falls for independent bookstore owner." "And Rebecca?" Charlotte asked, quietly, after Emma had run off to explore the bags Julian brought. His face hardened. "She and James are lying low. My lawyers found enough evidence of their financial misconduct to keep them quiet for a long time." Charlotte sat heavily on the plush sofa. "So it's over?" "The crisis is over." Julian sat beside her, taking her hand. "But we still have things to figure out." He was right. Though they'd grown closer during their 2 weeks of forced cohabitation, they hadn't really discussed what would happen next. The original deal seemed like a lifetime ago, but its shadow still hung over them. "I've been thinking," Julian said, pulling out the stack of papers. "I want to create a charitable foundation focused on literacy and education. The first project would be modernizing and expanding your bookstore, creating a true community center for children's literacy." Charlotte stared at the plans he spread out. Her little store transformed into something beautiful, with a proper children's reading room, a cafe, and space for educational programs. "Julian, I can't accept this. It's not a gift," he said firmly. "It's an investment in something worthwhile, something that matters to both of us. But people will talk. They'll say, 'Let them talk.'" Julian cupped her face in his hands. "Charlotte, I'm not doing this for the publicity or to buy your affection. I'm doing it because watching you and Emma with those children in your store showed me what really matters in life. And what's that? Love, community, making a difference in people's lives." He smiled ruefully. "All the things I'd forgotten about while building my empire of cold technology." Emma came running back in, wearing a sparkly new backpack Julian had brought. "Mummy, can we have pizza for dinner? Mr. Julian said we could." Charlotte laughed. "Did he now? I thought we could all go out," Julian suggested. "There's a great little Italian place around the corner. Very casual, no press. Like a family?" Emma asked hopefully. Charlotte saw Julian's eyes soften as he looked at her daughter. In the past 2 weeks, they'd grown close, bonding over their shared love of science fiction and terrible puns. "Yes," Julian said, "like a family." At the restaurant, tucked into a cozy booth, Charlotte watched Julian help Emma with her menu, explaining the Italian words and making her giggle. He caught her watching and raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Nothing, just..." Charlotte smiled. "This feels right." After dinner, they walked back to the apartment, Emma between them swinging their hands. The city lights twinkled around them, and for the first time in weeks, no reporters followed their movements. Back home, after Emma was tucked in bed, Charlotte and Julian stood on the apartment's balcony. The night was cool and Julian wrapped his jacket around her shoulders. "Move in with me," he said suddenly. Charlotte turned to face him. "What?" "Not here, not at Stone Summit either." Julian ran a hand through his hair, suddenly nervous. "I bought a house in the suburbs near Emma's school. It has a huge backyard, trees for climbing, space for a library." "Julian, let me finish." He took her hands. "I've spent my whole life building walls, protecting myself from getting hurt. Then you walked into my office with this crazy proposition, and suddenly all those walls meant nothing." "You don't have to do this," Charlotte whispered. "The store, the foundation, this apartment, it's already more than enough." "You still don't understand," Julian pulled her closer. "I'm not doing any of this because I have to. I'm doing it because for the first time in my life I want to build something real, something lasting, with you and Emma. What about your company, your life in the city? I can run the company from anywhere. And this life?" He gestured at the glittering skyline. "It's empty without love. You taught me that." Charlotte thought about Emma's question earlier. Did she love Julian? The answer was surprisingly simple. "Yes," she said. "Yes what?" "Yes to moving in together. Yes to building something real." She smiled up at him. "Yes to love." Julian's kiss was gentle, full of promise. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I should warn you, though, the house needs some work. The previous owners had terrible taste in wallpaper." Charlotte laughed. "Well, Emma wants her room to look like the night sky. We could start there. I was thinking..." Julian looked almost shy. "Maybe we could work on it together, make it our home." The word home hung in the air between them, full of meaning. Not just a place to live, but a place to belong, a place to love. "I'd like that," Charlotte said softly. Inside, they could hear Emma's quiet breathing from her room. Outside, the city hummed with life. And there on the balcony, a man who had forgotten how to trust and a woman who had risked everything for love held each other, planning their future. The weekend that had started as a desperate bargain had led them here, not to a fairy tale, ending but to a real beginning. With all its complications, challenges, and imperfections, it was better than any deal they could have made. Because sometimes, Charlotte realized, the greatest love stories don't start with a grand gesture or a perfect plan. Sometimes they start with an impossible choice, a leap of faith, and the courage to believe in second chances. The suburban house was everything Julian had promised. Spacious, full of light, with a backyard that made Emma squeal with delight. But moving in together brought challenges none of them had expected. "I don't understand why you won't let me hire more help," Julian said one morning, watching Charlotte make breakfast. "Maria would be happy to move from Stone Summit to here. Because I want this to be a real home," Charlotte replied, flipping pancakes. Not a showpiece with staff and formal dinners. Emma sat at the kitchen island happily drawing while she waited for her breakfast. Her new room was indeed painted like the night sky, though it had taken 3 weekends and lots of laughter to get it right. Julian had proven surprisingly good at painting stars. "It's just," Julian loosened his tie, looking frustrated. "I want to make things easier for you." "I know," Charlotte smiled, kissing his cheek as she passed. "But easy isn't always better. Emma, honey, breakfast is ready." As they ate, Julian's phone buzzed constantly with business calls. Charlotte could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept checking his messages. "Big meeting today?" she asked. "The board wants to discuss the foundation." Julian put down his fork. "Some of them are concerned about the direction the company is taking." Charlotte felt her stomach clench. She knew some board members weren't happy about Julian's recent changes, working from home 3 days a week, focusing on charitable initiatives instead of pure profit. "They're wrong, Mr. Julian," Emma said suddenly, looking up from her pancakes. "My teacher says helping people is more important than making money." Julian's face softened as he looked at Emma. In the month they'd been living together, he'd become more of a father to her than her real dad had ever been. "Your teacher is very wise," he said, "but sometimes grown-ups forget what's really important." After breakfast, as Julian prepared to leave for his meeting, Charlotte noticed he seemed unusually nervous. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked, straightening his tie. He caught her hands, holding them against his chest. "Rebecca called yesterday. She's making a play for control of the company." "What? How?" "She's convinced several key investors that my recent decisions are emotionally driven, that I'm not thinking clearly because of you and Emma." His jaw clenched. "They're calling for a vote of no confidence." Charlotte stepped back, feeling sick. "This is my fault if I hadn't—" "Stop," Julian pulled her close again. "You and Emma are the best things that ever happened to me. The company, it's just money and power. I won't lose you over it." "But it's your life's work." "No," he said, softly. "My life's work is what we're building here. This home, our family, the foundation that will help other families. That's what matters." After Julian left, Charlotte tried to focus on getting Emma ready for school, but her mind kept racing. She knew how much the company meant to Julian, even if he wouldn't admit it. It wasn't just money and power. It was his legacy, his chance to change the world through technology. "Mommy," Emma's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Are we going to have to leave?" Charlotte's heart broke at the worry in her daughter's voice. "Why would you think that, baby? I heard you and Mr. Julian talking about the bad lady trying to take his company." Emma's lower lip trembled. "If she wins, will we have to go away?" Charlotte hugged her daughter tight. "No, sweetheart. Whatever happens with Julian's company, we're a family now. That won't change." But after dropping Emma at school, Charlotte made a decision. She drove to Julian's office building in the city, somewhere she'd never been before. The receptionist recognized her immediately. "Ms. Rivers, Mr. Stone is in a board meeting, but I know, that's why I'm here." Charlotte took the elevator to the top floor, her heart pounding. When the doors opened, she heard raised voices from the main conference room. "This infatuation has gone on long enough." That must be Rebecca's voice. "He's throwing away everything we built for some small-town nobody and her brat." Charlotte didn't wait to hear more. She pushed open the conference room doors. The scene inside froze. 20 people in expensive suits stared at her. Julian half rose from his chair, his face shocked, and there was Rebecca looking exactly like Charlotte had imagined, beautiful, polished, and utterly cold. I'm sorry to interrupt, Charlotte said, her voice steadier than she felt. But I have something to say. This is a private board meeting, Rebecca sneered. Security! Let her speak. Julian's voice cut through the room. Charlotte took a deep breath. You all think Julian's lost his way because of me. That love has made him weak. But you're wrong. Love hasn't weakened him, it's given him clarity. She faced the board members directly. The Julian Stone you knew was brilliant but cold. He built amazing things but forgot why they mattered. Now he's building something greater. Technology that helps people, programs that give children a future, innovations that make the world better, not just richer. Pretty words, Rebecca said, but the numbers, Charlotte laughed. I run a small bookstore, but even I know that companies with strong social initiatives outperform their competitors. Julian's foundation isn't just charity, it's smart business. It builds community trust, creates positive press, and inspires employee loyalty. She could see some board members nodding thoughtfully. But more than that, Charlotte continued, it shows that Julian Stone isn't just a brilliant mind, he's a leader with heart. Someone who understands that true success isn't measured in stock prices alone. And I suppose you're the one who taught him that. Rebecca's voice dripped with sarcasm. No. Charlotte met Julian's eyes across the room. He always knew it. He just needed someone to remind him that it's okay to care, that love isn't weakness, it's the greatest strength we have. Silence fell over the room. Then one of the older board members cleared his throat. She sounds a lot like your mother, Julian. Sarah always said a company without heart was just a machine. Charlotte saw tears in Julian's eyes at the mention of his mother. He stood, moving to take her hand. My mother was right, he said to the board. And so is Charlotte. I'm not choosing between love and business. I'm choosing to run this company the way it should have been run all along, with innovation and compassion. He faced Rebecca directly. You can call your vote, but first, I'd like the board to see some projections for the foundation's impact on our market position, and maybe it's time they knew about your creative accounting at your own company. Rebecca's face went pale. One by one, the board members began shaking their heads. I withdraw my motion, Rebecca said stiffly. She gathered her things and walked out, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The board meeting continued, but now with a different tone. Charlotte tried to slip out, but Julian held her hand tight. Stay, he whispered. You belong here. As she listened to Julian present his vision for the company's future, Charlotte felt a deep sense of peace. They still had challenges ahead, merging their lives, raising Emma, building their dreams together. But standing there in that boardroom, her hand in Julian's, she knew one thing for certain. Love wasn't a weakness to overcome or a bargain to be struck. It was the foundation everything else was built on. And their foundation was stronger than any force that tried to break it. 6 months had passed since the dramatic board meeting. The renovated bookstore was having its grand reopening, and Charlotte could hardly believe her eyes. The once struggling shop had been transformed into a beautiful community space, with the original charm intact but enhanced with modern amenities. What do you think? Julian asked, watching her walk through the new children's reading room. The walls were painted with scenes from classic stories, and comfortable reading nooks were built into every corner. It's perfect, Charlotte whispered, touching the custom-built shelves. Exactly what I always dreamed of. Emma ran past them, excited to show her friends her special corner, a window seat decorated with star-shaped cushions dedicated to Emma's reading adventures. The store was packed with people for the reopening. Charlotte saw her regular customers mingling with corporate executives, all united by their support for the new literacy foundation. Even some board members had come, won over by Julian's vision of combining business success with community impact. Mrs. Peterson, Charlotte called to her elderly customer, how do you like the new large print section? It's wonderful, dear. The old woman patted her hand. And I see you've kept my favorite chair. Indeed, among all the new furniture, Charlotte had insisted on keeping some pieces from the original store. It wasn't just about preserving the past. It was about honoring the journey that had brought them here. Lisa appeared with a tray of refreshments. She'd accepted the position of store manager, allowing Charlotte to focus on developing educational programs with the foundation. The local news is here, Lisa whispered. They want to interview both of you. Charlotte felt Julian tense beside her. Despite everything, he still wasn't comfortable with public attention on their private life. We don't have to, she said softly. Yes, we do. He squeezed her hand. It's important for people to see that success isn't just about money. It's about building something meaningful. The interview went better than Charlotte expected. The reporter was more interested in the foundation's impact on children's literacy than in rehashing old scandals. "And how does it feel?" the reporter asked, "going from a struggling small business owner to running a major educational foundation?" Charlotte looked around at her transformed store. "The truth is, I'm still the same person. I still believe in the power of books to change lives. The only difference is now I have the resources to help more children discover that power." "And you, Mr. Stone, your company's stock has actually risen since you began focusing on social initiatives. Any comment?" Julian smiled. "Let's just say I learned that the best investments aren't always about financial returns. Sometimes they're about investing in people, in communities, in love." After the interview, Charlotte noticed Emma sitting in her reading corner with a group of children. She was reading aloud from Charlotte's Web, the same book they'd been reading the morning Charlotte had made her desperate proposition to Julian. "It feels like a lifetime ago," she said to Julian, watching their daughter, because that's what Emma had become to both of them. "What does?" "That morning in my office, when I offered you a deal." Julian pulled her into a quiet corner. "I've been thinking about that, actually." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I have a new proposition for you." Charlotte's heart stopped as he opened the box, revealing a beautiful vintage engagement ring. "This was my mother's," Julian said softly. "She made me promise to give it only to someone who reminded me what really matters in life." He got down on one knee, drawing gasps from nearby customers. "Charlotte Rivers, you walked into my office offering a weekend of your life in exchange for saving your store. Instead, you saved me. You reminded me that love isn't a business transaction. It's a gift we give freely, expecting nothing in return." Tears rolled down Charlotte's cheeks as he continued. "You and Emma have given me the greatest gift of all. A real family, a home filled with love and laughter, a purpose beyond making money. So now I'm asking." He held up the ring. "Will you make it official? Will you marry me? Say yes." "Mommy!" Emma's voice rang out. She had abandoned her reading session and was bouncing excitedly nearby. Charlotte laughed through her tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes to forever." The store erupted in applause as Julian slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her. Emma ran to join their hug, and Charlotte felt her heart might burst with happiness. Later that evening, after the crowds had gone, and Emma was asleep in her star-filled room at home, Charlotte and Julian sat in the store's reading room. "You know," Charlotte said, curled up in one of the old armchairs they'd kept, "some people might say our story is like a fairy tale. Poor bookstore owner meets wealthy prince." "They'd be wrong," Julian replied, pulling her onto his lap. "Fairy tales are about perfect people and magical solutions. Our story is better. It's about real love with all its complications and challenges, and all its rewards," Charlotte added, touching her engagement ring. Julian kissed her softly. "I love you," he said, "not because of any deal or arrangement, not because you're good for business or make me look better to the board, just because you're you. I love you too," Charlotte whispered, "for showing me that sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards." Through the window they could see the bookstore's new sign illuminated in the evening light, "Rivers of Stories, where every tale matters." Below it, in smaller letters, "A Stone Foundation Community Center." The store that had once been a source of desperate choices had become a symbol of hope, not just for them, but for every child who would discover the magic of books within its walls. Charlotte thought about the journey that had brought them here. A desperate proposition, a weekend deal, a love that grew despite every obstacle. She thought about Emma, sleeping peacefully in her room painted with stars. About Julian, who had learned to open his heart again. About herself, stronger and braver than she'd ever thought possible. Some might say you can't put a price on love, but Charlotte knew better. Sometimes love costs everything you have, your pride, your fear, your carefully built walls. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it gives you back so much more than you ever dreamed possible. In the end, that was the greatest lesson of all. Love wasn't about the price you paid or the deals you made. It was about having the courage to risk everything for the chance at something real, something lasting, something true. And sitting there in the quiet bookstore where their story began, Charlotte and Julian held each other close, knowing that their love story, complicated and messy and perfectly imperfect, was worth every price they'd paid to find it.